How and when do you decide if a new inquiry is a good fit for you and your business? Welcome to the Masters in Travel podcast. I'm Whitney, owner of Undiscovered Sunsets and The Hive. This is a podcast for us, by us, where we have deep conversations with honest answers. Nothing is off limits here. Here with me today to discuss fielding new inquiries and specifically his approach to inviting a new business to his agency and their team is Jeremy Zulik, owner of Jet Set World Travel. Jeremy, so good to have you. Good to see you.
Hey, Whitney. Great talking with you. Great being back on the podcast. I never thought I'd get an invite back after the first time, so this was a win.
You haven't offended me too bad yet. Actually, this podcast topic came up from something that you recently shared that my response to you both emotionally and verbally was like, "I'm sorry, what?" So in recent conversations you shared that when it comes to new inquiries coming into your agency's team, that it's a yes until it's a no. And I kind of paused for a minute and I thought, and I was like, my mind started racing. And I realized immediately that I'm the exact opposite. If a new inquiry comes into my inbox or just, if I'm chatting with somebody out and about, maybe it's not a no, like I'm not saying no to them, but in my head, I am very much like, it's probably not until you share with me a few key details that then it might morph into like, okay, maybe this might work. Like I definitely start on the prove to me this is going to be worth my while type of attitude, which is not necessarily positive or good. But it helped me realize that when you said from your perspective that it's a yes until it's a no. So can you just take me to like the beginning of where did this come from? Has this always been your approach? Did it transition into this after some, iteration and learning moments? Like where does this come from for you?
So yeah, let me actually start off. I am not a travel advisor. I have planned 4 trips in my entire life before I was effectively fired and told I shouldn't do this again. So my big
I
PSA
did not know
of
that. That's funny.
oh yeah, this was I realized very quickly that this was not going to be my ideal line of work. And so as everybody that can't do what's the next iterative
They
step is
teach.
they teach, and so that's
Yep.
kind of where we're coming from right now. So this has been a great episode. I'm so glad I got a chance to come on. I hope the rest of your future shows are great. No,
So great to see you.
so great to the rest of the Masters in Travel. No. Okay, so this whole concept is all a bit contrarian. Let's call it that. And I don't say any of this just for the soundbite or, um, I understand there's a little bit of friction when it comes to like going against best practices, which is I believe what Masters of Travels talks about all the time. But I don't think it's necessarily wrong. And what I mean by that is I'm a self-admitted self-help junkie. I read nothing but nonfiction, podcasts, personal life with a therapist. Like I give it all to me. I want to know, how
Mhm.
I can be better. And what I think I've kind of teased out, at least in my head, is there's very few things when it comes to like best practices or pieces of advice that are universally correct all the time.
Okay.
Things are usually situational.
Sure, sure.
Short of things like core values, or if there's like some sort of fundamental function to a market or a system or something like that. Other than like these, call it the universal truths or like whatever you want to call that bucket. These life hacks, these best practices, these efficiencies, these time hacks, they're all situational. And generally speaking, you can find a counterexample of how the exact thing that you were advised to do. And it could also be just as beneficial in any given circumstance. And so, this is somebody who was striving always for, how can I be more efficient? This is just how my brain works. There was about 7 or 10 years ago, I kind of made this logical switch in my head of like, I need to stop worrying about being efficient and start worrying about what is the most effective way to go about doing things, which might not
Okay.
necessarily be the most efficient. So a
Okay.
lot of backstory to get to like where we found ourselves in this current situation. So
Okay.
everything you described of like, this client of like, they kind of have to prove that they can work with you, or they have to show that they've got the budget, or whatever your criteria is.
Right, right.
We definitely didn't have that as like the starting approach, like this idea that it was a yes until a no definitely wasn't something that we started day one with. It was
Okay.
a learned experience.
Okay.
So it was back in 2019. We had just finished up busy season, and we were looking at our in-house team, which was small, 2-3 people, and our close rates were much lower than we had expected. We track all
Okay.
of our close rates of leads come in, how many signed fees, how many move forward with planning,
So
and
do you consider closed as paying a fee or depositing, or like where do you mark the closed
yeah.
factor?
Uh, so close we a proposal phase will move into, or a qualifying phase client will move into proposed when they've paid a fee. So inquiry comes in and then client pays a fee. That's what we would call a closed,
A close
lead.
rate. Okay.
Yep.
So then you're wanting to see of the leads that came in and that didn't get to paying a fee, what's happening there.
Right. Exactly. So, these advisors were all well trained and mentored, all by Lindsay. And so we knew that they knew what they were doing. They had a lot of, this wasn't like, month one in the business.
Mhm.
And so our very first thing was like, what's going on? And let's immediately look outwards. What's wrong with these leads? Is the quality worse?
Can I
Um,
ask what the close rate was that you felt that it was low? Do you
yeah, sure.
remember?
So we don't track an aggregate, we track it by source. And so if it is a past
Mm,
client, we
that's
expect
smart.
a 50% close rate. If it's a referral, we probably expect around the same, somewhere between 30 and 50%. If it's
That
something
seems
that's,
low. If
well,
it's a past client, only a 50% close rate?
yeah, I mean, there are a lot. I mean, like, again, so this was 2019. We had moved, Lindsay was still kind of like they took their clients one big trip a year. And this was
Mhm.
kind of in the phase where we were shifting into more of the full service generalist agency where we want the weekend trips, we want the side
Okay.
trips, we want all of the above. And so there was like this learning curve of like how to fully serve a family and clients in all of their travel needs.
And so it is a past client, but maybe they're reaching out for like a weekend to go to a family reunion and you're like, "Well, that's not
Right.
exactly."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, okay, that's interesting. So 30 to 50% for repeat or referral, and then what would you consider a positive close rate for something like social media or just Google or someone just randomly landing on your website?
Yeah. And so we aim for roughly about 1 out of every 5.
Okay.
We want to deal with the luxury kind of part of the market, so 4 or 5 star. Um, while we absolutely do like honeymoons or one-off like anniversary occasions, we're really looking for clients that we're going to be traveling with us. Like all advisors want a client that's going to travel multiple times a year for multiple years, and kind of like
Yeah.
that's the ideal avatar of an A
Mhm.
client for us. So
Mhm.
1 out of every 5, so
Okay.
20%. And so we were kind of coming in shy of that.
Okay.
And so red flags are going off, or like, are the quality of leads, has that dropped off? Has the market shifted? You know, everything, all of our focus was outward looking, and everything that we had like, you know, analyzed really kind of wasn't coming up with, there was nothing viable, and that wasn't true. Um,
And you had experienced advisors on your team who had gone through a robust training who weren't brand new, so the immediate thought was not to look internally to see.
of course, we definitely weren't doing
Yeah.
anything wrong. This was definitely something outside was definitely,
Obviously, there's a problem with the leads. Yes, but I think that's natural. I think that that's what
yeah,
any where any business owner would start. I think it makes sense.
right. So we kind of hit this roadblock. Luckily, Lindsay and I had and for those that don't know, I am the spouse and co-owner with Lindsay Epperly of Jet Set World Travel. So I'll refer to Lindsay kind of throughout the podcast. We had a trip coming up to Ireland that spring. And then anytime we're traveling, this idea of a change of scenery always was when we do our best thinking of working on the business rather than in the business. So we've had our biggest leaps in our company when we've gotten a chance to get away and really kind of like uh,
Mhm.
So we were really excited that Ireland, this was going to be the thing that we cracked. Like we were like,
Okay.
what's going on? And so we were sitting in Ashford Castle, and we kind of had that aha moment. What we figured out what was going wrong. And so we were reading through some of the email engagements that some of our advisors had, and why they, we asked them to pull like, which ones do you think should have worked, but they didn't, and let's figure out why. And so the general summary was, Mr. and Mrs. Client, sorry, we can't work with you because of X. And then the client would reply back, oh, well, we could pivot around that. And then the response to that will be like, well, that's great, but actually, additionally, like these, why reason is also something that we can't work with.
Okay.
And then you're like, okay, well, we can also shift that as well. And then the advisor pointed out like one more thing. And so like it, basically this client was begging to work with us, and we said no 3 to 4 times. Until finally, like, and this is
why I never lie about the reason.
Well, they weren't
just
lying.
I didn't mean to say that they weren't lying, but like there have been moments that I don't want to be honest about why I'm saying no, because it feels easier in the moment. And I'm always thinking like, I don't want them to reply and say, well, that's fine, we'll change that. So I just go straight for the heart and I tell them the real reason.
Well, and to be honest with you, I mean, like, again, it's this advisor wanted the business. It's not like this was a trying to scare away exercise. It was, there had been a learned mechanism, and unintentionally at this point, of gatekeeping, and that this client had to pass each, checkpoint in order to work with us.
Do you remember what the reasons were?
I don't. I tried to pull up the exact email scripts that we had like looked at and which one was and I couldn't find it.
I mean, like the most common reasons coming out of my inbox are, I don't know anything about this destination, and unspoken, I don't want to know anything about this destination. Budget, if it's just completely misaligned. If you're describing a 25K trip and you're telling me it's a 10K investment that you want to make. Time, if it's super, super last minute.
But see, this is the great part about this. There's all of these variables and all these like what we then started referring to as levers of, what is, and I think we'll probably get deeper into this entire conversation of, but the switching from the mind frame of like, from a no until it's a yes, like basically prove that you are able to
all of my requirements,
right,
and then I'll say yes. Yeah.
And flipping that into it's a yes until a no, and basically we have all these levers at our disposal that we know about, and the client doesn't necessarily have any understanding or knowledge, and nor should they. They're not experts in this, and so instead of using this as a filtering method, like use this as a one, education, or two, like use it as a opportunity to better sell, because that's in fact what this is. This is a business, and most businesses aren't in the process of trying to weed out prospective clients from the start. Generally,
so you're sitting in Ashford Castle, you're reading through this email correspondence where the client is begging to work with you. The advisor doesn't not want the business. The advisor probably does want the business, but it's just not like aligning. What was the next like part of your conversation or your realization together with Lindsay?
Yeah. So the pen and paper, and anybody that knows Lindsay knows that like she loves a good project and she's creative as all gets out. So like this was like I identified the problem and then I basically got out of her way and let her go to work. But
did Ashford Castle like roll in a whiteboard for her
I wish.
afternoon tea?
Yeah. That would have been great. And unfortunately, no, we were definitely just kind of like sitting in the lobby. If anybody's seen the 2 giant wolfhounds that are there, it was epic. Again, like it's seared into my brain now, but like, yeah, it was creating a qualifying process and a new script essentially for our advisors to follow. And it felt so obvious, like looking back at it, we tried to do like a postmortem of dissecting, like how in the world did we get to this place? And funny enough, I think this is where I think I see it most within the advisor community of it comes from a good place. These advisors that we had, they had been trained well, they had been mentored well. I believe mentorship is probably the second best way that anybody can learn how to do this business, only behind, experience in doing it yourself. So like, but that mentorship was actually the key point in which case where it had unintended consequences.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of good mentors generally have proven that they're successful in their career. This one, no different. And they've honed their skill set over the years to where there are a lot of times now they're focusing on, how do I get more efficient? How do I
Yeah.
work less, do more, kind of like these peripheral wants rather than like these fundamental pieces.
My attitude is 100% about efficiency because of how much time was wasted early on in my business.
Sure. But you got the fundamentals down at this point. What we realized is the advisors, and what we see with a lot of new advisors is they're trying to learn the efficiencies without like those fundamental like building blocks like to start off of.
Can you
Um,
say more about that?
sure, just this idea of an advisor that's in year 5 necessarily probably isn't scrapping the way an advisor in their first, all things hold it being equal, like social flair, spheres of influence, network, sales capabilities, like all these intangibles hold, you know, constant. An advisor that's in their 5th year with an established book of clients doesn't have the same problems that a first year or second year advisor is having. And therefore, like these pieces of advices are situational. They don't hold the same weight to both of these advisors. And so they should be treated differently.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So you're rewriting scripts, you're rewriting, um, I guess, just how to communicate with clients or how to talk to them when these new inquiries come in. So if that same client came into that same advisor 6 months later with a new script, how would that interaction look differently than the first one?
Sure. So the very first thing was our intake form. That was the first, like, this is the first interaction most outside leads interact with, you know, what was the time Epperly Travel, now JetSet. And so we stripped it. It was this very comprehensive form
Okay.
of just a gauntlet of questions of trying to weed people out that aren't the right fit. And so we scrapped all of that and we're
Sounds
like,
like mine. Yep.
what is the minimum amount of information we need to understand if this is a potentially viable trip? We don't want the
Okay.
client to spend one more ounce, that we don't want them to burn one more calorie than they absolutely need to, in order to do business with us.
I'm so scared where this is going because it's gonna rip apart my own
No, no,
my own
no.
form and my own website.
No, Whitney, it's every, I started with one, I don't do this as an advisor. Two, I told you that this is a contrarian view and I'm not doing it just to like, poke and make everybody rethink everything. And then
No,
most
but
of,
I appreciate the opportunity to rethink what I'm doing because I'm saying this with a big smile because I don't necessarily think that what I'm doing is perfect or the be all end all.
sure,
Um, and as I'm thinking through, like just that simple question of like, what's the bare minimum amount of information I need to then go to the next step? It's probably half of my current form.
sure. But also think about this. I led with, not all advice should be to blanket advice. I think every situation matters. And like the season that you are in as an advisor, this advice is really important. While I
So
think
let's
it's
get
really
to the end before I decide if I'm gonna
there you go.
if
Yeah.
I'm gonna do any of this.
While I
So
think
what's
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
the
off. Go ahead.
bare sorry, I keep cutting you off. What's the bare minimum amount of information? And then what else were you considering in like the new inquiry kind of form phase?
Yep. So we stripped down the form as much as we could to get what we thought was, at least created enough information to where we could do a little bit of research to say, this is viable. This could be viable. I think it is kind of where it was.
And what information is that? What's the bare minimum information you want your team to have to decide is it viable?
That's a great question. And we've iterated the the form a little bit, but I think largely a lot of the fundamentals are still there now.
Is on your
I mean,
website?
besides contact information, I think it is like travel dates, budget, idea of location,
Number of
number of
travelers,
people, number of travelers.
dates, and if they're flexible. Um, have they worked
Basically,
with a travel advisor before?
we want high level categories. We don't want granular detail. We don't want to know if you need hotel and air and or cruise or tour, because the
Mhm.
more time that they're having to spend thinking about it, you're creating friction with before they even get a chance to like get in your front door. Like we want to welcome everybody in, and then we can then start doing the filtering process, because a lot of clients don't know if they want private versus a group tour, or like if
Sure.
this is even the right location for them. And so
So,
before scaring them away, let's get them in, let's invite them in first, and then we'll go from there.
okay, so my heart rate is decreasing a little bit. This is not as scary as I thought it was. This actually it's basically what I always tell it, especially if you catch me like not in my inbox, if we're like speaking in person, I'm like, there's a date factor. And not by date like June, but like number of days.
Sure.
Like, are you looking at a 7-day trip or a 15-day trip? Because the investment is totally different.
Yep.
So, number of days of travel, total number of people, like 2 adults versus 6 adults is a very different situation. And then destination. And I always tell people, like, I need 2 out of 3 of those.
Mm.
If
Yeah.
you know your destination and you know the number of people, I can tell you what a budget is going to look like. If you know your budget and you know number of people, I can tell you destinations that are probably going to work.
Right.
So like I just need 2 out of 3 of those, and that's essentially what you've got included on this form is
Right.
those 3 factors.
But you'll see a lot of advisor forms that are like, if you've got to scroll multiple times as a client, or if I'm doing this on my phone and this is now becoming tedious, like my threshold to want to engage has just dropped so much more. And this is just to like the initial, like the process hasn't even necessarily started yet. So like first impressions matter. And so like, how do we get clients like more likely like primed and ready for us to basically move into this next step, which was this like processed script, for lack of better words, and not like a speaking script, but like if this then that type of
Yep.
framework.
No, I mean, it's fair that I'm looking at my form now and I think it's 2 scrolls, not like 5. But there's certainly a lot of information that I could gather after they agree to like move forward and plan a trip together.
Sure.
It would just be another form. It would be like a client profile form.
And I think all of that's important. Again, we're not robots. We're not in the business of just ticket taking. And so like I think all of that information is important. I don't think it's important at the very first interaction. And
I think that's
so
fair. I think
I
that's
think
fair.
it's finding out where to layer that into that client experience,
Mhm.
and what kind of slowly. Here's another thing: is like you want this person to be invested in this process, and each iterative step, they're buying in more and more. And so, instead of trying to 100% them over the head from the get go, having this like investment trail of breadcrumbs, in which case they're slowly more and more engaging with you to
Mhm.
like buy into this idea that they want to work with you.
Sure.
It kind of feeds into that.
And totally unrelated, but today we had our advisor accelerator calls and it's all about client experience. And one of the things that came up is like, how do we ask questions to clients that like pull out the nuance type of details about them that help us personalize their trip? And one of the questions, and I realized in conversations today that one of the questions that's great to ask in a discovery call is actually what I ask on a form. And I don't think it should be asked on my form because I
Mm,
don't ever get good answers.
yeah.
And it's just tell me about like a trip that you've been on that you really enjoyed, or tell me about a trip that didn't go well and why. And I would say 50% of the people who fill out the form, they're like, I just really can't think of anything. All of our trips have been so great. And I'm like, I called trip. Like, there's no way that's true. Like, there's definitely a trip that like something happened. But even just today, I was like, that question shouldn't be on my form. That should be a
Yeah,
conversational question. Um, so it's not necessarily that we don't need this information or we don't need to ask. It's where and how and when
absolutely.
we're
Well,
asking.
and this next part of it, which we were very guilty of, is getting on the phone. I think this was a critical part that was easy to skate over in an industry that largely gets done via email only. Um, and it's basically doing that initial discovery call. I think is critically important in closing in getting that sale, that prospect one step closer to paying a planning fee. And a lot of
So
that, yeah,
they fill out a form. So I am like, I could not possibly be more protective of my calendar. So here goes the next step. They complete a form, which is, I think that you are asking like really important questions, but it is really short and sweet. So I think it does seem like you found the sweet spot there. What comes once the form is completed? It goes immediately to a call, or is there some communication by email if one of these factors doesn't quite feel viable or feel like a good fit?
yeah. So great question. It's definitely email first, and so first email response, um, the formula of that email, basically it has, I think it was 4 parts. The first and foremost, there had to be a level of excitement around this trip. We are here to, this client is coming, they're going on a luxury vacation.
Mhm.
Um, they do not need to be told all the reasons why this can't happen or the stipulations in which case this needs to happen. Like, no, we're pulling out the exclamation marks. We are ready. Like, we are pouring into that excitement and like kind of like leaning into that. So first and foremost,
Okay.
that was the key first thing. The second one is we wanted to make it personal. Nobody wanted to feel like they got an auto response template email. Like, especially if you're about to drop, what in a lot of times is a lot of money for a lot of individuals, right? Take a moment to make a little bit personal. Like
Yeah.
read the intake form, and if they say they want to go to Italy, talk about the last time you were in Italy, or talk about the last client that you just had in Italy, or anything. Just show me that you took literally 30 extra seconds out of your day
Yeah.
to like acknowledge that this wasn't just some standard like copy
Mhm.
pasted pre-written script.
Right.
The third aspect, which we added on later, was a statement that we would make to, this is going to sound maybe slightly bad, but to rock their confidence. We wanted them to make sure they knew why they needed us. So usually it was dropping a little bit of like, oh, I'm so glad you're actually, working with an advisor around this trip. The travel advisory warning that just happened, the strike that just was announced, the new regulations that came around, whatever. You
Yep.
basically need to just drop like one piece of
Yeah.
snippet that basically showed to them that like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm glad I'm also now working with you.
I like that a lot.
And
It's
then
yeah, it's not only excitement, but it's also like establishing yourself from square one as the
yeah,
expert and the professional.
exactly. And then this last piece is basically introducing a further, I'm not going to call it a full questionnaire, but it dives a little bit deeper into some of it's like one step deeper than the intake form. So, and another part of this is reiterating some of their answers back into the intake form or into this questionnaire. So it's,
Okay.
you now have these basic answers, and you can either basically, an email would fall into one of two categories. It either is immediately greenlit saying, hey, I've got $50,000. Me and my wife want to go for a week to Italy. We are flexible on all dates.
Let's do
Cool.
it.
Sign me up. Let's go. Let's get on a call. I can't wait to hear about it.
Can I call you now?
Yep. No additional questions needed. Like let's move
Cool.
forward. Nobody needs help with those. Those are easy.
Right. Yeah.
So really it kind of falls into what we call like yellow light. These like,
Yeah.
basically this is all other trip requests, but we're going to call it the the middle of the bell curve when it comes to we think this is doable, but we need some more information. So, um,
Mhm.
these are things that you had started mentioning. Like, do you have specific travel dates? Do you have like an exact price point that you don't want to go over? Are you, you know, are you dead set on this location? Like a little bit more nuance, a little bit more in depth. But you're asking to essentially get on a call here. And here's the thing, I say 30 minutes, and that scares a lot of people because if you have to spend 30 minutes with a lot of yellow light clients, that immediately freaks people out. What we shifted to is you call it a 15-minute discovery call, but on your
Okay.
calendar, you're blocking off 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is if it's a dud of a client,
You
you
can
have an
go.
out at the 15-minute mark. If it's a great client, you tell them, "Hey, I'm pushing my next call because I really, really am excited about
Smooth.
talking with you about this. Do you have another 15 minutes to discuss this trip? Because I think this is going to be awesome." They feel
Okay.
special now. You've already allotted the time.
Very
You-
smooth. Okay.
so these are efficiencies to this process. But
Okay.
bas- but basically, these yellow light clients, you have all these levers at your disposal that you know that can be doable. You just have to find out from the client which ones they're flexible on.
So with these yellow light clients, is it literally when you say questionnaire, is it like another form that they're filling out, or is it just kind of we have some follow-up questions. I'll share you these by email, but like we can discuss on the call. Kind of giving them a heads up of like this is what I want
Yeah.
to ask on a call.
We have advisors that basically have taken both forms. Like one is legit, like it says questionnaire at the bottom, and they've pre-filled like here are some specific follow-up questions I have. Others make it more conversational as part of the email of like acknowledging an answer from the intake form, and I want to dive deeper and to get a little bit more clarity. Again,
Okay.
you're slowly walking them into this being more invested without them having to repeat their answers, but giving more specificity.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. And so we're getting on the when I say we, you are getting on the phone with these yellow light clients, knowing that this may or may not move forward because you need that additional context and you need to make sure that it is truly a viable
Well,
inquiry, but you're leaning into, well, let's get on a call and talk about this more.
so it's a both and. Your follow up email with these additional questions also help determine whether the call is going to be viable. Again, we're talking about like call it the middle bell curve of these requests. So things could happen like if they cut their trip down from 14 days to 10 days, then you can do it. If they do, Costa Rica instead of Hawaii, then the budget can work. Um, you know, if they're open to, you know, pivoting to from a July travel date to a September travel date, then all lights are green. So like you're asking these questions while also saying, let's jump on a call. What time and dates work for you? Because inevitably they give those answers back and you have that prepared for going into the call, whether there's any flexibility around these variables.
So it's asking these questions, which I think are great, but then immediately just saying, here's a link. So I guess the only reason why I don't already offer a link right away is if one of their questions is like, no, it's absolutely July in Hawaii for 14 days. Then is it still a yes until it's a no? Like at what point?
Well, this is part of the process is like you are doing everything in your power to be able to work with this client. You're not forcing them to do it.
Presenting options, educating them on,
You are
length of
optimistic.
trip and
Yep.
destination makes a big difference. Okay.
And like there's a lot of benefit that comes to this. One, not only are you like clients just don't know. Like so many
Yeah.
times they just have no idea. And so what turns out to be like, oh, they read the form as price per person rather than total trip. Or they they didn't know how much Hawaii cost and they're fine, upping the budget 10K, but that this is the starting point. Or like a lot of what we got is husband gave the hard budget of 12K, but wife said they're fine going up to 18. And so then it's like, okay, we can work with this.
So I think the example of the client going, "Oh, we just didn't know." Like, yes, we can be flexible and then scheduling a call. Like, that's all great. And that makes a lot of sense. I think my fear is they come back and they're like, "No, we don't. We still want our original request. Now I've scheduled a call with you." And now in my mind, I feel like if we're not open to any flexibility, then this actually is no longer viable. But now a call is on my calendar.
Yeah, but that a call is really easily cancelable. That's not that much. So,
I
all right,
guess.
what happens when everything's exhausted and
Hmm.
the client it's just not a good fit.
Yeah.
And this is where we would call this client is now red light. This lead is
Okay.
not a good fit for our agency. And so, we say this all the time within our advisors across all things, but like clear is kind. Like you don't need to
Yes.
sugarcoat it. We will never tell somebody that hey, you can't travel to this location for
Right.
this dollar amount. Like um
You absolutely can
you
if
absolutely can. It's just we're excited for your trip. Uh, Explain this is the value we add. These are the partnerships that we bring to the table, and to like execute it at anything that we can even remotely provide value. Like these are the things that we need to change. And so like if that's not going to work, it's not personal. You're
right.
not, you know, you're not breaking up with this individual. You're just and
It
try
feels
to
like it because my other, like, constant like, another reason why I have, like, so many hurdles before the phone call is because for me personally, it's so much easier to say no over email than over
sure.
a call.
Of course it is. Of course it's way easier. Um,
And so I don't want to call and be like, "I'm sorry, no." But I guess
but
that's what you're training. That's what you're preparing your
but
team to do.
flip the script in your prospective client going and trying to work with another business, and it ends up that it's not going to be a good fit. But they end up giving you a free resource to go to help. Like, hey, we're not, Whitney, I, we're not going to be able to add value in this situation. Really excited about what you're taking part on. We found a lot of really valuable information at this website. I think this would be a really good spot for you to do some additional research. And by the way, if there's any future travel that you think might fit within a luxury 4 and 5 star, or if you know anybody, we would love to give it another shot and see if we could be a part of that. Like you're leaving that door open. Again, it's always a yes until it's a no. And even you want to leave the door open for future times. You have no idea they're going to
Mhm.
get married and now father-in-law is paying for the honeymoon.
Yeah.
They now hit a new career mark and are doing well and are in a new income bracket. Like
Mhm.
this, there's this human nature of wanting some level to wanting to feel wanted. This doesn't have to be some game of like high school of playing hard to get. Uh, don't make this client go through this 15 magical question gauntlet and otherwise they're rejected and have to go fend for themselves in the world.
No, I think that this is all good, and honestly, I don't know that in execution I don't know that what your team does and what I do is that different. I think what's drastically different is simply the mindset and the perspective around it.
100%. And so it was funny, we were talking offline a little bit and you used your own words, not mine, your pessimism of this entire idea.
Yeah.
Um, and I was giving it some thought. And what's funny is I don't think you have to change the pessimism. Keep your pessimism. These don't have to be mutually exclusive paths. Um, I believe every good professional advisor should have a standard or client qualification process. It's kind of the whole point.
Mhm.
Um, all I'm saying is keep that internal. Don't
Sure.
put that
Sure.
on the client. You shouldn't be presenting yourself that way. That would make you a less effective business.
Yeah. I think a couple things that you shared are really powerful and would be super easy for me to add. So, like, when it's a budget concern, I will generally say, like, based on our experience with our partners in this destination, blah, blah, blah. In my experience, the starting range would be here, but you shared this. And then I ask, like, is it flexible? And so I think I'm kind of ticking that
Perfect.
off. And a lot of people do come back and say yes. What I don't think that I do currently is for last minute requests, if I ask, like, are your dates flexible? Because I just straight up say, like, if you want to travel in a month, like, it's no, get out of here. But I could definitely ask, like, are your dates flexible? And the answer is still probably no, but I could at least ask.
Sure.
Um, and I rarely offer a different destination, which I think I could definitely do because there's a lot of we want to go to Italy on this budget and that budget would actually work really well in Croatia type of situations that I could um, certainly share a little bit more proactively.
Sure.
And
And you're a
Hawaii and Costa
seasoned
Rica is a
yeah,
perfect example as well.
you're a seasoned experienced advisor. So like imagine now you're in the first 3 years of your business. You've been given this best practices form of how to qualify a client and you don't know any better to ask these follow-on questions. So like it was yeah, it was more of a changing of an outward posture than anything on
Mhm.
this idea of a client, a lead, a prospect is a yes until it's a no.
So, h- how long ago was this implemented? Did you say you were at Ashford Castle in 2019?
I think it was 2019. It may have been 20. No, I think it was yeah, spring of 2019. I think is if I recall correctly.
So 2020 doesn't count. So this was kind of implemented in a way that you could track data from 2021, let's say, I guess. How has your close rate shifted and changed since changing the, changing the process, changing the scripts, changing the perspective of communicating with new leads?
So the close rate for referral clients has gone way up. Referral clients are now well over 50%. One, I think there's an initial already trust that was
Mhm.
inherited within that. So that's where we saw the biggest lift in prospect. Funny enough, whether it's leads via social media or SEO, granted, our funnel is much bigger now than it was back in 2019.
Sure.
So we're casting a much wider net, but we haven't got any less efficient. And to
Okay.
me, that was the key sign is there the that hole in the net didn't grow as we start like again
Mhm.
we're not going to be a good fit for all clients. We're not a come one and come all travel agency. We are in a very specific niche of the market within luxury. We're generalists. I mean, there are a lot of like factors in which case there's a lot of clients that want to travel just aren't going to be a good fit. But the fact that
Mhm.
we are scaling the amount of leads coming in while also maintaining that essential close rate,
Right.
um, to me shows a sign of success. But then also too, and I haven't taken the time to figure out how to quantify this, but the leads that would have been lost that are now repeat clients, that are now referring clients, like
Yeah.
these are the intangibles of like the client that would have gotten away you is now an entire new lifetime value, like that lifetime value of that
Mhm.
client is now in the ecosystem. And that to me was what we're not going in the wrong direction anymore.
Right. Yeah. Have you had any conversations with the in-house advisors about like how they feel about the shift? Like do they feel more empowered or more comfortable? Do they feel like things are going a little bit smoother with client inquiries? Like have they commented on this at all?
So, a couple different things here. New advisors within the agency, in which case this is how they were taught from day one. So there's an aspect of like, not that they didn't know any better,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I think it's funny what your initial reaction is to all of this is akin to, you know, the downside to all of this is it's clearly more work and more effort and more time. Like in the very essence and nature of all of this, it is a less efficient process. It would be way easier to create a more robust form that filters at a higher rate and lets fewer through, but at a more effective, you know.
So, but that's kind of what I'm wondering cuz so at the beginning you said your close rates were like 30 to 50% and that felt low to me because right now if you fill out my form we communicate by email, you schedule a call, 90 to 95% of those inquiries are closed for me. And if it's not, it's 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 that we get on a call and suddenly it's me saying no because something has changed. And it's most often like a personal reason for which they've decided not to move forward. And it has nothing to do with me. But so I sometimes I say that kind of proudly, but I'm also sitting here thinking that's not necessarily good because who are the people that I turned away that had I approached that communication prior to the call a little bit differently, they could have turned into a yes. And
Sure.
I almost said no too quickly
Right.
or without offering other options that they might have been open to. And I just didn't even present them. So we just didn't even get there.
Well, and then also, what are you uh, actually tracking here? Because this idea, we were tracking inquiry to paying a fee. And so we would
Hmm.
get um, a lot of inquiries all the way filtered down through this very no until it's a yes. And so when we actually did engage with like an actual prospect, like we would work with them most frequently. Like we would most of the time when somebody checked all of the boxes, it was almost guaranteed that we would always do a trip with them. But like that's not what I would say is an effective business. Just because you've pre-screened out all of the no's because they don't immediately fit your filters doesn't necessarily mean you're not leaving a lot of really good business potentially uh, outside.
So stop me if I'm misunderstanding your what you've shared, but like of all the inquiries coming in, I'm saying I'm saying yes to about 60% of them. Of like
Yep.
this seems viable. Let's go ahead and have a call and then of those I guess it's 95% I mean that like pay a fee and really move on to trip design. So I think what this is making me wonder is like of the 40% that I'm currently saying no to, is there some potential in that 40% that if I shifted a little bit of communication, a dash of my mindset and perspective about it, maybe tried offering one additional option, like would that turn into a yes in a way that is mutually beneficial?
So to bring this to an analogy, if you're taking a quiz that has 10 questions and the first 6 questions you're like, I know these for sure, and then the next 4 you're like, so since I don't know those 4 questions, I'm not going to answer them. And then you feel really, really good about yourself that I said, I answered 6 questions. I got 6 right. I'm the smartest person in the world.
Sure.
Like in reality, that means you still got a 60%.
Yeah.
Like you didn't get 100 just because you limited the amount of
I
questions
could
you
have at
answered.
least guessed on the last four.
You could have worked with those. Maybe there's one, maybe there's 2 more. And so maybe that's kind of the loose analogy of
Hmm.
and you know what? Again, this is all situational. If you're at a point in your business where you've got 30 client like proposals out right now and you are dreading waking up the next morning because more are going to be in your inbox, maybe you need tighter qualification processes of what it means to work with you. Maybe you're letting too much into when it comes to this filter,
Yeah.
but that's not everybody.
Or maybe
And
you need an
so,
assistant.
or maybe you need an assistant, or maybe you needed an assistant 6 months ago, like somebody probably had advised you to do, and you're like, I don't need one yet.
So I think that that is a really important distinction as well because there's so many ebbs and flows in your business. And I always encourage everyone, like when I share how strict I am with my calendar and with my inquiries, but I'm talking to someone who's in the first few years of their business, I am always the first to say, like, I did not start like this, and you
Yep.
cannot start like this. You have to know where you are and you have to know what inquiries are coming in. And the only thing I say that is like not good is no boundaries and no qualifications at all. But when you do set qualifications and boundaries at the beginning of your business, they can be loose. They don't have to be like crazy strict. They can still be like way out here and then they slowly come in. But now what's happening for me that I do have an established business and now I do have a full-time employee, and that full-time employee has been with me for a year. And so suddenly I'm looking at a workload that is like, wow, volume is up, but workload is down, which is good. That's what we want. I'm actually in a place of I can handle more volume. So now where is it going to come from? And the knee jerk reaction is like, well, I got to kick in my marketing. I got to go find new people, but actually I'm finding myself consistently like looking inward. How can I look into the like this is making me think, how can I look into the inquiries that are already landing in my inbox, and what would like a modicum of additional effort and communication and education into some of those maybes or nos, what might be the result of that? How can I look into engaging with and showing appreciation for my really big referral sources more than I currently am? How can I check in with all of these warm leads that just kind of fizzled out and never went anywhere? So I'm actually finding myself wanting to look more inward for that growth rather than go do a splashy marketing campaign. Um, so this
While
is
not
making me think a
nearly as
lot.
fun, I mean, the Instagram series is always going to be much more enjoyable to go and, do that.
The end product looks good. The actual doing it part is not my, I avoid it at all costs.
It's true.
Um, so you said at the beginning and you've said throughout, like this is about being effective more than efficient. So can you talk to me more about where, like what efficiency is lost? Like what's the downside to this approach?
Yeah. So the very real answer is this takes more time. This takes more brain power and effort. You are now having to you can't automate nearly as much. Like this
Right.
takes like being more human. To instead of like letting you set in place rigid structure and systems to do the work for you, you're now making those softer or more gray. So
Hmm.
but that's what you want. You don't want those rigid because you want to take that gray space and you want to be able to turn those into yeses because whether it's education, whether it's just asking a simple question, there's just so much potential out there that is being lost because a form filtered somebody out that with good intentions.
That could have had potential,
Yeah, exactly.
had a little bit more time and energy been put into it.
Or even just like this idea of bringing energy and excitement. So often, I mean, I, all day long, all I do is talk to travel advisors. And right now, the number one biggest thing that I like is, communicated is burnout. Like how
Yeah.
travel advisors are stressed. Clients are pushy, suppliers are slow, prices are high, inventories are low, turnaround times are slow. Like nothing is easy. Like
Yeah.
everything an advisor does right now is difficult. And so that's true and that's real,
Hmm.
but don't make that the client's problem. That's not their fault. The
Right.
client is here and is excited about taking a trip. And as an effective business, which would be to, higher revenue, grow sales, higher client satisfaction, whatever that metric is that that you put on your own business, and we highly advocate that you treat this as a business. A lot of that doesn't need to be lost in some sort of efficiency process life hack of, you know, an intensive qualifying form. Get on the call and live with that client and their excitement for their first time they're ever going to Africa. Like that's so cool.
I mean,
That they want to be excited with somebody.
I think it's such a fair point, and I'm especially just sitting here thinking about how much work we do to even get that inquiry to land in our inbox in the first place,
Yes.
and what might it look like if we slowed down before kicking them out? Like I'm very much came into this conversation of like you're either green or you're red, in or out. I don't got time for this. I got things to work on. And like that is true, but like you said, that's not the client's problem. That's not their challenge. And if I actually like mentally prepared myself that 2 or 3 times a week, I'm going to sit down for probably 60 to 90 minutes and respond to new inquiries that are still a little bit yellow, as opposed to just firing off all the red emails and being like, nope, 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 maybe later. Um, that I would actually have a lot more work, a lot less work to do down the road of looking for those new clients and looking for those new inquiries to continue expanding my business.
Sure. And here's the other thing is this doesn't have to be some sort of like cold turkey approach to like how you do business now. Maybe you're setting this threshold for all like any leads that are coming in under $7,000, you don't apply this process to. Like
Yeah.
you're okay with this new idea that things are yes until they're no, but there's still a hard filter on X budget. Or maybe it's only destination specific. Maybe you're like, everything can be a yellow now if they ask for Italy, because I'm going to try to see if they are open to pivoting to another country. Because I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I just can't do 2 weeks for 10K on the Amalfi Coast. And so
Mhm.
instead of saying that's not possible and losing that altogether and potentially crushing somebody's excitement about going to Italy for the first time, now you've implemented this new idea of like, I can make, there's potential here and the client can have an incredible experience. And so I'm going to apply this just to Italy inquiries.
Mhm.
And so taking this, I would not advise, don't do it an all or nothing. Like this
Right.
doesn't need to be applied to everything.
There's so much nuance, yeah,
And start
with
small. See, find your own like rhythm and pattern to it. Like maybe phone calls are still a hard stop for you. Maybe like that's just you hate being on the phone and that's the way you don't communicate effectively via that channel. And so, but you can adapt this same idea and concept and principle. Like now you're doing Loom videos. Like take down the, barriers to entry in the intake form. Your reply back is now in the form of an exciting Loom where they can see your voice, they can see, make it a personal connection. They want to do this trip now, but they still have, a form of communication other than being turned away at the start.
right, right, right. No, I think that that's really valid, that, like, key takeaways is, like, there's still a lot of nuance. We can still have hard boundary lines. And also, if we added in a touch of a softer approach, like, what's one thing we could do to just be a little bit softer than what we currently are? If we are, like, way on the end of the spectrum where I am. I don't, maybe not everybody's quite as, probably not everybody's quite as bad as I am. But I think for me, if there's one thing that I start doing differently tomorrow, it's actively thinking about and then suggesting to them, like, well, what would you think about this alternate destination? Like, are you open to this? And I have found that when that comes naturally, it doesn't always come to me. Sometimes it comes from the clients, that they will say first, we're open to ideas. They're like, I mean, a client yesterday was like, Amalfi and Saint Tropez. And I was like, you know, like, let's, and they're like, but we're open to ideas. And I was like, great, we'll chat more in our call. But
Exactly.
sometimes I can present those alternate ideas to them. And a lot of people, I think, would say, cool, like, tell me more. I guess I can soften up the red emails a little bit, but I do think it will be really helpful. So I appreciate the shift in perspective and you just kind of sharing your story and kind of how you got to this approach, because like I said earlier, I don't actually think that what you do and what I do is so drastically different. I think it's the perspective and the mentality that we go into it with that is very different.
Couldn't be more better said.
Jeremy, thank you so much as always for your time and just for sharing so openly and honestly. I really appreciate it.
Whitney, this was a blast. Thanks so much.